Well, a week after the Prime Minister came within 12 votes of losing the leadership, Tony Abbott appears to be on somewhat of a listening tour today in Western Sydney with backbencher David Coleman, and for the rest of the week he'll be covering most of the states. Is this the PM trying to prove to his detractors that he's changed? What does he need to say to the backbench and voters? Joining me now is former Liberal Minister Peter Reith and former political Labor strategist Bruce Hawker. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me on the program. Peter Reith, first to you. I know a week is a long time in politics these days, and that leadership vote does seem like it was quite a way away. But this is a pretty important week for the Prime Minister. We're in between parliamentary sitting weeks. He needs to prove to the backbench, I think, that he has listened to that shot across the bow. What should he be doing this week?
Well, look, I mean, he's basically campaigning. Look, that's probably been locked in for some time. I'm not sure I'd sort of, take too much political points out of what he's doing this week, especially. Clearly, the backbench sent a very strong message. I'm not sure that he got the message when it came to Phillip Ruddock, I'd have to say. And look, the truth is, though, that there are big economic issues which the government has to face. And I think the backbench would expect to be consulted on that, but I think they're also looking to see, how the government's now going to, deal with some of these really big issues which are, important to all Australians. So he's got a huge amount of, big decisions to be made on his plate. Got to think about the strategy. He's got the budget coming up, and you can be sure of one thing coming out of that spill, and that is those backbenchers, they will be watching every move he makes to see whether or not he's up to what they expect of him.
And that's the problem now, isn't it, Bruce Hawker, that there is this whole new level of expectation here. I know you lived through the Gillard-Rudd or Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years. How do you then manage that expectation when your leadership is questioned?
Well, I think you actually have to change course. That's the first thing you need to do, Laura. You have to steer the government much closer to the centre of the political spectrum, and I'm not sure that Tony Abbott's capable of doing that, but I think he definitely does have to do some of that. He needs to tell the Australian public what he's going to do about the paid parental leave scheme. He said it's going and it's going to be replaced by something. Now that would seem to me to be an opportunity to go out and sell a childcare package which would be quite attractive to a lot of people, notwithstanding the fact that it'll still cost $5 billion a year and it'll probably still be paid by big business. But he does need to come out with new policies. He does need to demonstrate that he's listening to both his backbench and to the Australian electorate. But all these things are incredibly difficult for the man because in all his 40-odd years of political life, I don't think he's really ever changed at all, really not so much from his days as a student at Sydney University. So he's got a very pugnacious, dogmatic style, and he has to change that. And the Australian public has to accept that he's changed. And unfortunately for him, he's really concreted in an image, which I think will be very, very hard for him to change.
Yeah, that's right. But I guess what has been seen across Tony Abbott's political life as well is his ability to really hold on. A lot of people said that he wasn't leadership material. He's been leader of the Liberal Party for 5 years. But Peter Reith, going back to some of those points, moving to the budget in the policy space, the paid parental leave scheme is dropped. There's two very big barnacles hanging in the lead up to the 2015 budget. Does the government just need to cut those loose?
Well, I think he ought to cut the idea of taxing big business, quite frankly. I think that's going to go down like a lead balloon. It's a consequence of the paid parental leave. But the fact is, the government's facing a situation where basically we just cannot afford to going on spending money that we don't have. Now, this was the problem that we had with Labor. Tony's been saying, look, we're not the Labor Party. Well, that's good. That's the right approach. But a tax cut, as much as some people would be happy to have it in the small business community, basically we can't afford it. So I think, there's some big issues sitting there. And in fact, the unemployment situation, I think, is a as a building concern. And if you hear what the Reserve Bank said the other day, I mean, I think every Australian should be very concerned that there's basically no prospect of seeing a surplus in the next, 10 years, maybe 20 years. And debt is climbing.
So in that sense then, Peter Reith, is this 2015 budget make or break for the leadership team of Abbott Hockey?
Well, look, who knows what's going to happen between now and then. But I think for the government, though, adversity is still, however, it can be an opportunity. And I think this is the way they've got to be thinking. I mean, some of the issues Bruce have raised there sort of, second order issues, and they're important in themselves. But what the government's got to have really is a narrative about where things are at and where they're going to take the country and how they're going to deal with the issues. The one thing we know for a fact, and that is on fiscal repair, you can't look to the Labor Party to fix it. The only people who are going to fix this are possibly the coalition, and they've really got to show people how they're going to deal with this issue in the future. And I think that's, look, it's a huge thing in front of them, I must say. But, if ever Abbott had an opportunity to build a stronger position for himself politically, well, there's a need that the country really has.
But the problem now, I think, is that, with rising unemployment, they're still cutting interest rates. It's not really the time for great austerity measures. So, there are people out there that need some assistance. It's now really the time to be stimulating the economy. So he's going to have a big challenge with whatever message he comes up with. If he's going to be cutting, well, is that the sort of message that business wants to hear? They certainly don't want to hear that they're going to be paying for paid parental leave Mark II, whatever that is, and I don't think people in the people who are just working on a daily basis to make ends meet are going to want to hear about more cuts. So I think it's going to be a very, very hard time for the government.
Yeah, the RBA the governor though did warn last week that Australia isn't always going to enjoy these good times, and now is the time to get the debt and deficit in order. But Bruce Olga, I think it's really interesting at the moment when you look at the opposition's responsibility in all of this. I'm picking up, and you probably will disagree with me here, that the public are losing patience for an opposition and a Senate that blocks but doesn't come up with alternatives. Do you think that Labor needs to come up with these alternatives earlier than they would have done in the past, like in an election campaign?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the public is itching for that at the moment, but I think it's a vulnerability for Labor, and it always has been, certainly in recent years. The whole question about economic management, I don't think they were appalling economic managers, but let's not get into that argument. I think, though, they have got a reputation for that now, and the number one priority, I think, for Bill Shorten is to come out with measures which show that they are going to get the budget under control. Maybe not as quickly as the Libs might do, but they will certainly have a policy to do it. And I think that is going to be, I don't know if it's going to be make or break for Bill Shorten. I think the main obstacle to Bill Shorten's ascendancy is the Liberals changing the leadership of their own party, not policy at the moment. But yes, I do think they do have to come up with policies which demonstrate that they're economically responsible and careful. If they don't, then that makes the task easier for the government, whoever is leading it, in 2016.
We heard also this week, after the leadership failed spill, the Prime Minister promising that there would be no recriminations. It appears that if anyone lost out in all of that, it was the Chief Government Whip, Phillip Ruddock. Now, some behind the scenes are very uncomfortable with this. Abbott's detractors are using this against him. But this was Cabinet Minister, Families Minister Scott Morrison this morning on that.
That's a matter for the Prime Minister, and I think Phillip Ruddock, as always, has shown the sort of dignity and the discretion and the loyalty that has marked his many, many years in public service, and that's why he's respected by not only his colleagues, but, as you rightly say, people right across the country, and particularly those from the many ethnic communities, 270 odd, that make up this tremendous country.
Was that loyalty repaid?
Well, that's a matter only that those two men can discuss.
I just don't accept that anyone is out of a job because the job of being a Member of Parliament is an incredibly important job, a very, very important job. But what I did before Christmas was renew the ministry. What I did late last week was renew the Whips team, and that's what governments do.
And Peter Reith, earlier on you seemed to suggest that this was a bit of a misstep.
So I didn't hear that, Laura, but look, let's face it, Tony's known Phillip Ruddock, you know, for yonks, basically. He certainly knew Phillip as well as we all do, and have for many years, and with respect. You know, we know what Phillip's like. You give him the job, and then 18 months later he's out on his ear. So, look, I don't know what was in Tony's mind. I don't even know whether it was initiated by him or by maybe his chief of staff. I just don't know. But let's face it, Tony had a problem going into that spill, and that is that he simply did not know what the numbers were. And now I don't know whether that's what, you know, motivated his, you know, dumping of Phillip Ruddock, but you'd have to say, given that this change happened just after the spill, you'd have to be inclined to link the two. And the fact is that Tony spoke to a lot of people back in January, and when it comes to a meeting in February on a spill, he still's got no idea. So I don't think that was a Ruddock issue, quite frankly.
No, it's not. I mean, it's shooting the piano player, isn't it, really? I mean, you can't blame the whip for your failure to sell government policies or because you've broken election commitments. And what it said to the electorate, I don't know how deeply loved Phillip Ruddock is. I suspect that most people know him, but that's about it. And no disrespect to Phillip Ruddock, he's the father of the Parliament. But here's a fellow who talks about changing and mending his ways and so forth, and the first thing he does is neck the bloke who he says should have delivered him the numbers. So it looks recriminative, and that's not good.
Yeah, it's perhaps not a good look. But Bruce Hawker, I want to ask a final question to you about Queensland now. Annastacia Palaszczuk has ushered in her new ministry. Now, a lot of old faces, a lot of new faces there. But what does Annastacia Palaszczuk need to do in the first couple of months of her premiership? I think it's fair to say that during the election campaign that many people knew that she didn't stand for asset sales, but they don't know much else about her or what she stands for.
Yeah, it's a blank sheet she can work off here. Look, one thing's for sure, she's going to have to stick to the election commitments she made. There's one thing that we've learned out of the last few months and years is that if you break your election promises, then the public is now going to treat you very harshly. The good news from her point of view is that she was very modest in her election commitments because they said that they were not going to sell the remaining electricity and other assets. So I think that's going to be a bit easier for her. I think she needs to send out a message that this is a steady, centre-of-the-road government that's going to be focused on jobs, health and education. In other words, do the things that state governments are meant to do and do them well, and I think she'll be rewarded. I've got a theory that whoever comes along and delivers stable, solid government without too much controversy, without too much of excitement, is going to be there for a long time, because the Australian electorate's pretty much over all the topsy-turvy stuff we've had over the last few years.
Bruce Hawker, Peter Reith, we are going to have to leave it there for PM Agenda this afternoon. As always, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Quick break here on the program. We'll be back at the top of the hour with a whole another hour of PM Agenda.